Extending a very warm welcome on behalf of the University of Washington's African Studies program. My name is Christopher Townsell, and I am director of the African Studies program as well as an associate professor of history here at the UW. And on this unfortunately sad anniversary of events going on in the Sudan, we have an esteemed guest, Professor Hassan Elhag Ali, um, who is a professor in the political science department at the University of Khartoum. He earned his PhD from the University of North Texas, and he has served as the Dean of the Faculty of Economic and Social Studies at the University of Khartoum, as well as Director of the Higher Academy of Strategic and Security Studies. Um, Among his kind of esteemed list of accomplishments, he has worked as a visiting professor in Ahmed bin Mohamed Military College in Qatar, as well as the Graduate School of International Area Studies at Hankuk University in South Korea. And he was the recipient of the Arabic Prize for Humanities and Social Sciences Research in 2014. Now, currently, he is a visiting researcher at the Center for Conflict and Humanitarian Studies in Doha, and his recent publication is entitled Unstable Transitional Period: The Transformation of the Hybrid Coalition in Sudan. So, Professor Hassan, we are extremely honored and humbled to have you here with us today. And I guess the first question that I have for you is just, 12 months in, right, into the kind of goings on in the Sudan, how would you describe, I guess, the current state of affairs from your perspective?
Yes, at the beginning, I would like to thank the Africa Study Program at the University of Washington for inviting me to speak about the current situation in Sudan. Uh, Actually, I prepared a presentation, a PowerPoint presentation
Absolutely, yes.
that would give you a good idea about the development of events in Sudan up to this moment. I will speak for about 40 to 45 minutes, and then I would leave the floor for discussions, Q&A. Uh, so if you may allow me, I have a PowerPoint presentation. I would like to share it with you
Yes,
because
yes, please use your share screen feature. I
okay,
believe you're now the co-host. So if you have your PowerPoint pulled up, you
yes.
can use the share screen feature, and then we will all be able to see it as you. So
Okay, so I hope now you see the PowerPoint, the slides.
yes,
Okay. Uh, so at the beginning, it is very important to have an idea
Prof. Hassan, if you,
about.
sorry to interrupt, if you can start the slideshow. Um, yes. Thank-
Okay.
perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. So my talk actually evolves around the factors of hybridity and contention in Sudan, and later on, I'm going to elaborate on these issues. But at the beginning, uh, let me identify the key actors in Sudan, especially after the revolution that took place, it started actually in December 2018, and then the al-Bashir government was overthrown on April 2019, and immediately after the uh, overthrow of the previous regime, we started a transitional period, and the transitional period is supposed to uh, continue for close to 4 years, though it was extended. So it's very important to know the key actors after the uh, overthrow of the previous regime and the start of the transitional period. We have currently in Sudan, and especially after uh, the overthrow of the government, of the previous government, uh, we have a number of political actors, but we can classify them into three main components. We have the military component, we have the civilian component, and we have armed groups components. And each of these components also composed of a number of political actors inside each. So we have a different and a diverse identities of political actors who participated actively in the revolution, and also they are part of the transitional government and the transitional period in the country. So this is actually the composition. We have the military component. This composed of Sudan Armed Forces, SAF, and the Sudan Rapid Support Forces, RSF. And then we have the armed groups component. You have a number of armed groups. They are used to operate in the Darfur region of the country, and also in South Kordofan. This is at the southern part of the country. And in the east also, we have a number of armed groups. And then we have the civilian component, and this composed of more than 100 organizations, political parties, and groups. So the main division is between the military on one side and the civilians. So I will start with the military component, identify their identity and their interests, because this is very important. And later on, I will come to the civilians and to the armed groups. So the military, as I mentioned, is composed of the two main pillars: the army, the Sudanese army, SAF, and the Rapid Support Forces, RSF. The army, the official army, tried immediately after the throw of the previous government to protect the corporate interest of the military institution. And the main goal is to prevent interference in its organizational affairs during the transitional period, And this was guaranteed in the constitutional document that govern the transitional period, that the military would appoint the Minister of Defense, and then the military would consult with the civilians on the appointment of the director of the intelligence service. Also, in the discourse of the military, there is an emphasis on the role of the military as a guardian of the homeland. So these are the main interests of the military. In addition, the military has a network of economic facilities, economic companies that the military also wants to protect. Here, I'm showing the SAF companies, the official army. As you can see, this is a vast web of military companies as well as commercial companies working in different aspects, covering maybe the whole aspects of the economy. And this was a thorny issue during the transitional period, how to push the army out of the civilian sector and try to just confine the commercial activities to the military side, because in Sudan we have the military industrial corporation producing different kinds of weapons for the Sudanese army, and even they export some of their products to the region. Now I'll move quickly to the RSF, the Rapid Support Forces. Actually, RSF started as a pro-government militia, and it was notorious in the early beginning of this century, when the armed groups started their mutiny in Darfur. They staged a campaign there, and they were accused of committing gross violations of human rights. And this was mentioned in the UN report, the panel of experts who investigated the human rights, the gross human rights violations in Darfur. They named the militia at that time by the name of the Janjaweed, becoming very famous for this. But the pro-government militia witnessed a significant development in 2017 when the previous government enacted a law that was passed in the Sudanese parliament attaching the militia to SAF, to the Sudanese armed forces. But the official army at that time were reluctant to let the forces, this militia, part of the official Sudanese army. So at one point, it was attached to the security forces, to the intelligence forces. And at another point, it became part of the presidential palace. But at the end, it became attached to the Sudanese official army, but they retained their own uniform and their different independent facilities and car plates, and uh, they took part in regional conflicts, and I will come to this later on, the regional role of the RSF. This is slide is showing how the RSF became independent, though officially it is part of the Sudanese Armed Forces, SAF. On the left side, this is the logo of the RSF. And then at the lower side, you can see the plate number is different. They're keeping their own vehicles and plate numbers. On the right side, this is the official army. This is the logo of the official army. And then at the bottom of the right, you have, this is the official plates, vehicle plates of the Sudanese army. So now we are seeing two independent military bodies that functioning during the transitional period. So the strategic goals of the RSF changed from being a pro-government militia, tackling the conflict in Darfur region only. So they started, the leader of the RSF, General Mohamed Hamdan Daglo, famous by Himeti. He sided with the revolutionary forces, and he refused to side with the previous government, with Umar al-Bashir, the previous president, who established and created the RSF. So he switched at the last moment and became part of the revolutionary process, the RSF. And at that time, he was planning to have a greater political role in the country. And this was solidified by taking part in the war in Yemen and briefly in Libya. But I will come also to the regional side later on. This is the RSF also has a huge economic and commercial facilities. This is the network of the RSF, working in gold mining, in animal production, in commerce. So now it has a huge network of companies. Some of them part officially of the RSF, but the majority under the names of just regular individual family members of the Hemeti, the Dagalo family. So it's becoming, when they were erupted, the RSF was a very formidable military and economic force in the country. You can see here in the slides at the left side, this is a demonstration of power. This is at the end of the Ramadan season. This is like 3 days, 2 years ago. Celebration of the Eid. This is the RSF. They have their own prayers separate. but also showing their power. On the other side, on the right side of the slide, also the RSF was providing services to different communities. And here, the sign is showing that the RSF, they dig some wells for drinking water in certain areas. So extending it is social services to different communities, and at the same time building up the military capability of the RSF. Okay, now we'll move to the civilians, our second major component or actors, and the coalition that overthrew the civilian coalition that overthrew the government was called the Force of Freedom and Change. It was composed of more than 100 parties, unions, organizations, and groups. And within the forces of freedom and change, we'll find sub-coalitions. For example, we have the National Consensus Forces, composed of 11 groups. We have the Sudan Call Forces, 17 groups. So this is like an umbrella coalition, and they have a minimum agreement just to overthrow the government. Beyond that, they had a lot of differences. Okay, here we are showing the main components of the civilian coalition, the Sudanese Professional Association, 16 groups, National Consensus Forces, 11 organizations, Sudan Core Forces, 17, Civil Society Initiative, 27, Unionist Alliance, 8 organization. So this is the civilian component. And we have the armed groups, also composed of a number of armed groups. They operate in the Darfur region, in the southern Blue Nile and southern Kordofan region, and the east. So these three components decided and agreed to form the transitional government. So here we are having a complex hybridity. When I talk about hybridity, I mean there is a military or an armed group component to a coalition. So this is complex hybridity because we have three main groups. We need, if the government would like to maintain stability, it has to maintain a balance between the three main components. At the same time, within each component, the civilian, the military, and the armed groups, they have to maintain balance of interest within each component. So this is very complex. And after few years, it proves that it was not easy to maintain a balance of interest between these different groups and factions. So we have the transitional government was started in after the signing of the constitutional document. This is in August 2019. But the government started with the transitional government. It started with suspicion between the civilians and the military. So the prime minister sent a letter to the UN General Secretary asking them to send a UN mission to Sudan under Chapter 6 without the knowledge of the military component. So the military get upset and uh, they modified the mandate of the UN mission. But at the end, it came to Sudan. And the main idea of the civilians is to guarantee a smooth transition to elections at the end of the transitional period. Uh, um, I mentioned at the beginning of this talk that my main argument that the transitional government, the transitional period in Sudan failed due to three factors. Number one, the hybridity, having different components. Number two, a contention. In Sudan, we are witnessing a contentious politics. People are changing their political identities rapidly, switching from one alliance to another, trying to undermine other groups. And the alliance became a mechanism of destabilization in the country because we witness a number of alliances. And the alliance, usually, it has a minimum goals, agreed upon goals. So switching from one alliance to another becoming easy. And there is also polarization in the country during the transitional period. So we witness a split within the civilian components, the FFS, the FFC, the Force of Freedom and Change, and a number of political parties and groups be pulled out. And also witness the institutionalization of the RSF. And this is the sociology students call it, it witnessed a scale shift from being a local player, a pro-government militia working in a regional setting, to being a national player. So there is a shift of focus for the RSF with a huge resources, financial resources, and they start building up their military capabilities because they participated in the war in Yemen and became part of the regional security complex. And as I said, I will talk maybe later about the regional security complex in the country. So this is the conditions of polarization, using alliances as a means to strengthen the political parties, but it became a mechanism of destabilization because we are witnessing fragmentation of the political forces. So one way to gather strength is to build a coalition. But coalition politics became, as I said, a destabilizing factor because there is a shifting of alliances, reformation, reproduction of alliances during the transitional period. And there were also rumors about military coup. This was in September of 2021. And this is led to the dispute between the civilians and the military component. Up to that moment, the disagreement was minor and hidden, but it became apparent in 2021 after the military. They said there was a military a coup attempt to overthrow the government. So this led to accusation between the civilians and the military. So on October 25th, 2021, the Major General Al-Burhan, the leader of the army and the president of the Transitional Sovereign Council, he sacked the prime minister, the civilian, and dissolved the cabinet. And this was considered as a military coup, staged by the leader of the army with the support of the RSF at that time. So up to this moment, the military component was united against the civilians. But the Prime Minister, Abdullah Hamdok, returns back to power. He returned to power. This is after an agreement with Al-Burhan, the leader of the army. This is like almost 1 month after the military coup. But he didn't remain there for a long time. After less than 2 months, he resigned. And the civilians, they put out, with the exception of some technocrats, still there, and the armed groups still there in the government. So now we have a de facto government composed of the military and the armed groups and some technocrats. And we witnessed varieties of hybridity. A number of coalitions were formed. We have the status quo coalition. This is orchestrated by the military component and the armed groups. And we have what I call them hidden coalitions, hidden hybrid coalitions, actually. This is called the Radical Change Coalition, the Sudan Called Coalition, and the coordinating body of the National Democratic Forces. These are different types of coalitions. But an important coalition that I think led to the war is the zero-sum hybrid coalition, or a cartel hybridity. A number of uh, political parties, civilians, they decided to form a new coalition, and this coalition will form a new government. The coalition with the army would continue with the two components, but with a limited number of political parties. So the civilian component is not open for every political party, but for a limited number of political parties. So for this reason, I call this a zero-sum hybrid coalition, because the rest of the political parties were excluded. And one of the significant issues that was raised was the security sector reform. The army insists that the rapid support forces, the RSF, should merge with a single national army. The RSF, they said, yes, we agree, but we need some time to complete the merger with the SAF. So the RSF proposed 10 years complete the merger. The army said no, this should take place within 2 years. So there was a workshop to discuss the issue of this security sector reform, and the military, the official army, SAF, withdrew from the workshop. They said we will not accept this long period, 10 years. So here, the military component now is being divided into two over the issue of the merger to form a single national army. And this is accelerated, actually, the war. So the war that broke out in the 15th of April last year was not a war between two generals. This is a simplification, and this is being projected in the media. This is actually a war that has a regional component. It has also a component concerning the corporate interest of the Sudanese army. They will not accept a rival. And they insist on having a quick merger of the RSF. So the RSF, as of April 2023, they became a formidable force. As I said, they grew up from a force of about 30,000 to more than 120,000. And from being a regional pro-government militia to being a paramilitary force, national paramilitary force, with a huge resources, with a regional support, because they took part in Yemen. Still, they have troops in Yemen up to this moment. And they coordinated with the regional forces in Chad, in Libya. So the war started this actually on the 13th of April. It broke out on the 15th, but 2 days earlier, the RSF, they went to Merawi, and as you can see here in the map, it is up in the north, the Merawi Air Base, and they occupied the Merawi Air Base, and this would allow General Haftar in Libya to provide support later on to the RSF. And there are a number of reports that Haftar is providing ammunition and weapons to the RSF. So when the RSF moved and occupied the Merawi Air Base, the Sudanese armed forces said, now the RSF didn't communicate with us and to inform us about this movement. And this is a very dangerous escalation. So 2 days after that, the RSF, they mobilized their forces in a number of satellite images and reports, media reports, that the RSF mobilized its forces and it tried to overthrow the government or to take over, to remove Al-Burhan, the leader of the army, and accusing Al-Burhan of hindering the process towards election, and then they will take over with the help of a number of from the military itself. But this didn't materialize, it failed, and we got into the war. An important element in the war is the regional security complex. Sudan is part of two regions. We are part of the Sahel, the African Sahel. What happens in Chad or Niger or Mali, it will have a direct impact on Sudan and vice versa. Also, at the Horn of Africa, we are part of this regional security complex. What happens in Ethiopia or Eritrea will have a direct impact on Sudan and vice versa. And the two regions, the Horn of Africa and the Sahel, now became part of the Gulf politics. United Arab Emirates became an important player in the Horn of Africa. It has military bases. Now it is controlling a number of ports in the Red Sea and all the way up to Somalia. And they regard the RSF as a substitute for the official Sudanese army, because they think the SAF is mainly an Islamist army, and one of the main goals of the United Arab Emirates in the region is to fight political Islam. So they think that the RSF might be the pillar of the new Sudanese National Army. And I'm showing here, this is the Wall Street Journal. They're having a main sheet. They said a US ally promised to send aid to Sudan. It sent weapons instead. So this is showing the extent of the involvement of the United Arab Emirates in current war in Sudan. This is another map showing the continuing support from the Emirates through Entebbe in Uganda up to Chad, and they built actually a military facility in an area called close to Sudanese border. And they said this is for humanitarian aid, but actually this is a military facility supporting the RSF. And there are a number of reports in this regard, confirming the role of the United Arab Emirates in this regard. This is also another map that showing that Sudan is part of this regional security complex. We have the Wagner group, the Russian group, because also the Wagner group, they work in gold mining. They used to work in gold mining in Sudan. And sometimes they smuggle gold from Sudan to Russia. And the RSF itself, they smuggle gold to Dubai. So this is a very complex involvement of regional actors. And most of these are supporting the RSF in this regard. This is showing a photo from Khartoum after the eruption of the war. This is also another one.
Oh, and excuse me so much for interrupting, but I do see the time that it is 10:51 a.m. and that we had blocked out I guess 10 until 11 a.m. So I was wondering, would you mind
Yeah, I'm almost finished.
Oh, okay, cool. All right, great.
Yeah,
And
maybe I need 2-3 minutes, I will finish.
all right, cool. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. So this is actually like I have like maybe two, 3 slices. I'll go them quickly. The concluding remarks that if you have a combination of a zero-sum hybrid collision and high polarization, this would contribute greatly to violent conflict that happened in Sudan. And also, despite the rhetoric concerning civilian rule, there was a tendency to form alliances with the military or armed groups, and this has remained paramount during the transitional period. We witnessed in this war a number of atrocities and gross human rights violations, especially those committed by the RSF. And there are now reports on this. Maybe I'll talk to this later. There are a number of peace initiatives. They have the Jeddah Forum, the IGAD, the Manama, the African Union, but they failed, all of them, to reach a ceasefire in the war. And by this, I will conclude and end, and then maybe I'll open the floor for any questions or comments.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. That was very informative and enlightening. And I have been very pleased to see that since you began your talk, we've had several participants join in. So it is just great to see that that there was a lot of interest in your presentation. And so I would like to open the floor for questions. So feel free to either use the chat and type in your questions there, or if you would like to ask your questions in real time, if you could, I guess, raise your hand on, the Zoom raise hand feature, and we will try to call on people in the order that we see the questions being asked. And I guess I will use my privilege to ask the first question. But that is this question about kind of, now that we are basically a year in to formal hostilities, I'm wondering, while it is, of course, impossible to, see into the future and predict what will happen, now that Ramadan has concluded, I guess, where do you see kind of negotiations or kind of the interactions between the RSF and SAF going from here? So that is one question, but I also see Allah has a question as well. So why don't we have her ask her question as well, and then Professor Hassan, and I see Abdul Baghi as well. So here's what we'll do. Allah, if you can ask your question, and then Abdul Baghi, if you can ask your question, and then we will go from there.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you, Professor Hassan. Very informative presentation. Described the different actors categorized in three components operating in Sudan during the transitional period and their goals and interests, in addition to the three factors that led to the failure of the transitional period and the sequence of events until the eruption of the war. I would like to know Professor Hassan's thoughts concerning what would have been gone different for the transitional period to succeed with these three categories of actors with different views and interests within themselves and between them. Thank you. I hope it was clear.
Yeah,
And
it's clear.
also I have a request if we can have Professor Hassan presentations shared with us. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you for that. So I know that the presentation has been recorded. So between Yasir, Monica, and Professor Hassan, we will try to make sure that happens. So I think how we should do it is we'll have Abdul Baghi and Mohamed ask their questions as well. And then once they are all done, Professor Hassan, you can respond however you would like. So Abdul Baghi, you are next.
Okay. Thank you, Christopher and Yasser, for organizing this informative session, and thanks for Professor Hassan for devoting his time to enlighten us on an important topic. So my question to Prof. Hassan, on one of his papers, I think it was about military coups in Sudan, a political process, maybe the translation, because it was in Arabic, so I think this is how I understand it. So in the paper, he said that the paper elaborates that military coups were a direct result of political exclusion of certain groups. This exclusion was a result of coalition between parties with different interests, sometimes contradicting interests, apart from exclusion of certain groups. And maybe this war can be considered just as the same of this, using military or using RSF, using armed groups to exclude other groups. So my question is, does our political institutions, mainly parties, have strategic goals, or or their tactical maneuvers explain the lack of vision? And if they lack vision, how can we manage to have a stable and smooth transition in future? Thank you. I hope it was clear.
Right. Thank you so much for that. I think the last two questions will be Mohamed and Yasir. So Mohamed, why don't you ask your question, and then Yasir, it is appropriate that you would have the capstone question. So Mohamed, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity. Thank you, Prof, for the presentation, although I joined quite late, but I was able to catch some of the information there. Thank you. I have two questions. The first is, as you mentioned, Professor, a lot of the RSF propaganda is around the military, the SAF being an Islamist controlled army. In your opinion, does this claim have any grounds? The second question is, now that we are 1 year into this conflict, what would be a feasible end, in your opinion, to this conflict? And thank you very much.
And thank you so much for that question. And Yasir, you can ask the final question before Professor Hassan provides his comments.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Chris. And thank you, Professor Ahmed, for the great presentation. I wanted to ask about a point you mentioned, is that you said in the presentations that during the transition, political identities were changing rapidly. And that's was beautifully and a very clear, liquid grasp of that period. So I was wondering why those identities keep changing through the transition and after the Nigeria when the war erupted, and also if you think that Alex de Waal's political market would apply to this kind of like changing identities and changing alliances. Thank you so much.
All right, so thank you so much for those questions. And Professor Hassan, the floor is yours. And we'll try to wrap up in about 10 minutes. So that gives you a sense of how you would like to use your time.
Okay. Okay, thank you for the comments, for the questions. Concerning the, now we are like a whole year in this war. So what is the future of this war, or the conditions in Sudan? Where are we heading? I think this is also not an easy question, but my own judgment that we are seeing now tremendous changes in Sudan due to the war. And there is also a change in the mood, in the popular mood now in the country. What made things more complicated is the occupation of the RSF to Al Jazeera region. Because the RSF, they committed a huge violations in Al Jazeera. They robbed houses, they raped, they kicked people from their homes. So this is added a very negative image about the RSF. And now the popular sentiment is against allowing the RSF to have any future role in the country. Although this is now a military force, with huge economic resources, with an external backing from the Emirates and other regional countries or leaders. One way for me to achieve a suitable solution for this and feasible at the same time is to weaken the RSF, because this initially it is a pro-government militia with a bad image. This is in Darfur way back to from 2002, 2003 up to now. And now the RSF is in retreat currently. So if this condition continued, that the RSF becoming very weak, then it might come to the negotiating table with a reasonable conditions that might be accepted, not only to the to the SAF, the army, but also to the Sudanese people. This is the main way out that I see now. Now in there are some elements in Sudan, even there are some political leaders and political parties calling for the end of war. And nobody, I think, in Sudan needs the war to continue. But on what terms? How we can stop the wars and people, their cars, their homes were looted. The women were being raped. Not only this, but in Darfur, in Jenin, the people were massacred. 5,000 people were massacred. Some people were buried alive. So this is our what would happen to these cross violations. One way is to have a transitional justice. This is being proposed. Sudan has an experience, but not on this scale, on how to solve their disputes using traditional means. So for this reason, I don't see any end to this war soon. Maybe it will take quite some time until we have a very stable country. The question asked by Ala about what went wrong in the transitional period, I think the contentious politics that characterized Sudan, meaning that political parties, they need a quick win by any means. And in this regard, they would block, undermine their opponents, having this zero-sum mentality. So until political parties, they would have this accommodating spirit, the process of contentious would continue. But I think one of the outcomes or the implications of the war, this is a hard lesson that being learned by the Sudanese. And there is now a tendency that we should accept each other. We should accommodate others and allow the different opinions. So this is a lesson for the political parties because they tend to maneuver, tactical maneuvers, tactical gains, without having a true vision for the country. The change of identities. This is part and parcel of the contentious politics. People they switch because they need quick gains, quick political gains. They switch, they reproduce their um, conditions or their previous attitude. So the only way to conclude, the only way is to have this accommodating spirit in for the Sudanese, and to allow the people to decide at the end on who should govern them through fair elections. And I hope that this zero-sum mentality would disappear, and every political leader, every political party should realize that the only way forward is to accommodate everybody and to move forward. And thanks for giving me this opportunity, Professor Tonsil.
Oh, thank you so much for joining us. This has been amazing. And if we can all give Professor Hassan a hand, either, with your hands or the Zoom, clap emoji thing. So
Thank you.
yeah, so thank you so much for that. And again, we will make sure that it is made publicly available in some way, shape, or form. I'm thinking probably on our website. But we will do that. And when that is available, we will try to send a link to everyone who attended. As a kind of brief aside, looking ahead, our next African Studies event will be this Thursday at 3:30. We will be hosting a University of Washington communications PhD alum, Dr. Ruth Moon, who is currently an assistant professor of communications at Louisiana State University. She has recently published a new book with Cambridge University Press. No, sorry, Oxford University Press called Authoritarian Journalism, and it concerns um, press and the Rwandan state. So that will be in person in the Thompson building on Thursday, and there's more information on that on our website. I see we do have, or I believe I saw a hand raised, but it's now down. So, but yes, thank you so much again, Professor Hassan. Thank you, Monica, for including the link right here to I believe this is my kind of, yes, to the Ruth Moon event. We would love to see you all there if you happen to be in Seattle, but I know that some of you have signed in from hundreds, if not thousands of miles away from Seattle and may not be able to attend. Also, last but not least, this event would not have been possible without the work of Monica Rojas Stewart and Yasir Zaidan. So thank each of you for this. This has been an amazing event, an important event, and obviously timely one. So thank you so much to all of you, and have a great rest of your day. Take care.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very
Thank you
much.
very
Thank you
much.
for
You're
having
welcome.
me.